And everybody who on here who think anybody owe you an explanation about anything going on in our personal life, you need to get your life in order.
Those of you who fell in love with T.I. and Tiny's family while watching their reality show T.I. and Tiny, The Family Hustle, will be shocked to find out the behind-the-scenes truth of the family's dynamic.
I'm really staying out the way.
They presented themselves as a happy, tight-knit clan when the cameras were rolling, but that just wasn't the case when they weren't being filmed. T.I. and Tiny pretended to be loving parents to their house full of children, but now it's coming out that off-screen, they cared a lot more about their superficial interests than they did about their parental duties. You won't believe the most shocking part of the story. The way they treated their son King is truly sad to learn about. The truth about T.I. and Tiny's relationship to their children was revealed during a recent interview with King. King, who is 19 now, was speaking with Funny Marco on an episode of the podcast Open Thoughts when he shared a very surprising detail about his upbringing. Those of you who watch The Family Hustle almost certainly believe that King grew up in T.I. and Tiny's home. I mean, he appeared on almost every episode alongside his parents in their lavish mansion. But King opened up to Funny Marco about the truth of the matter, and it's absolutely crazy. Funny Marco asked a question about what it was like growing up in front of the cameras. That was when King revealed that things were not as they seemed to the public. According to King, he didn't actually live with T.I. and Tiny during his childhood. I imagine you're just as shocked as I was when I found out about this. How could that be? King appeared to be an integral part of the Harris family's home. Well, apparently it was all just a facade, a convenient guise that hid the sad truth. King told Funny Marco that he really lived with his grandmother during his childhood, not his parents. The craziest part is that T.I. and Tiny only asked King to spend time in their home when they were shooting episodes of The Family Hustle. They didn't care to spend time with King unless there was an audience watching. I feel bad for King. It definitely couldn't have felt good to know his parents only wanted him around to boost TV ratings or to improve their public image. King revealed to Funny Marco that as soon as they were finished recording an episode of the show, he would get sent right back to his grandmother's house. I think it could have been hard enough for King to have to deal with his parents sending him off to live with his grandmother, but I feel like it's even worse that T.I. and Tiny would have him come back to their house only when it was time to film their show. They basically treated their son like a business associate, all while he was just a child. Ironically, the network that produced The Family Hustle, VH1, described the show as an intimate look at T.I. and Tiny's experience with parenthood, which seems like a blatant lie when you consider the way they portray their relationship with King. After King's interview with Funny Marco dropped, fans were quick to express their disdain for the way T.I. and Tiny have treated King. The interview went viral and the response was loud. Social media blew up with comments criticizing T.I. and Tiny's parenting choices. One fan wrote that it was ridiculous that T.I. and Tiny chose to have King's grandmother raise him. The fan questioned why they would even have a child in the first place if they didn't want to handle his upbringing. It's a fair question. Sometimes it makes sense for a grandparent to step in and help raise a child, but that's mostly in the instance of an unwanted pregnancy and a parent's inability to support the child on their own. It doesn't appear that T.I. and Tiny should have had any issue supporting King. I mean, they were wildly wealthy. Another person addressed that exact issue. The fan wrote that it's crazy that T.I. and Tiny are rich and still chose to pawn King off on his grandmother. Like I said, it would make sense if T.I. and Tiny didn't have the means to provide for King, but they certainly do have those means. Another fan wrote that sadly, money often isn't enough to change someone into a better parent, and T.I. and Tiny's actions definitely seem to support that observation. Despite having all the money they could possibly need, T.I. and Tiny still didn't raise King. The same fan wrote that the money actually made T.I. and Tiny even more absent, the reason being that they have enough spending power to be able to travel all the time, which I think is a great point too. Another commenter seemed to agree that T.I. and Tiny were too wrapped up in their world of access to care about King. That person wrote that T.I. and Tiny are too concerned with substance, firearms, and threesomes to make time for King. If that's true, it's a very sad reality. I think it's clear to most of us that King should have been prioritized over such superficial interests, but while it's sad to consider, it doesn't feel unlikely. We all know that celebrities can be a wild bunch with some questionable priorities. It seems totally plausible that they chose to send King to live with his grandmother simply because they didn't want their lavish lifestyle to be interrupted. One other fan offered a very insightful observation. They pointed out that King's sister Zanique also spoke out against T.I. and Tiny's parenting before. What exactly did Zonique say? About a year and a half ago, she said that Tiny was not nearly as present as she could and should have been during Zonique's childhood. According to Zonique, Tiny was far too concerned with spending all of her time traveling around with T.I. Whenever T.I. was off on the road for some reason, Tiny went with him. The result was that Zonique didn't receive enough attention from her mother, which isn't very surprising considering all we know now about King's upbringing. It seems like T.I. and Tiny have a habit of failing to be fully present for their children. While the other kids haven't spoken out about T.I. and Tiny's parenting yet, I expect that they didn't get the care they deserved either. There's one more part of King's story that is really crazy. You won't believe the next thing I'm about to tell you. As you might know, King has had some not so flattering moments lately. He was arrested for not wearing a seatbelt, and he got into a fight at a Waffle House in Atlanta. But that's not the crazy thing I just said I would tell you about. No, the crazy thing was actually T.I.'s response to King's troubles. T.I. spoke on King's reckless actions. He made some pretty normal remarks about King learning from his mistakes and about better times being on the horizon. But the surprising part of his response, he said that King will always receive unconditional support from himself and Tiny. Now, if you're anything like me, you'll find that comment very ironic and likely rather upsetting. For T.I. to come out now when King is a young adult and vow his absolute support for his son seems like an empty promise when you consider the lack of support he offered King when King was a child. How can he say he and Tiny unconditionally support King when they didn't even have him living under their roof while he was growing up? Maybe T.I. and Tiny have turned things around and their actions will really back up T.I.'s words. It's just hard to believe that that will be the case considering King's upbringing. I wonder if King even wants T.I. and Tiny's support after being treated the way he was as he grew up. But I want to hear what you all think of this. Can you believe King didn't grow up in his parents' home? Do you think it's wrong that they only had him come over to film episodes of their show? Do you think T.I.'s recent pledge of support for King is genuine? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below.